asking for. So I'm glad you're all able to make it here today and join us for our webinar on the green economy. And we have two speakers with us. There is Sarah and Ashley, both from the Connecticut Green Bank. I'm Sue Quincy, and I'm with the DEEP down in Derby, and helping guide and supply information for our supplemental topic of climate change and adaptations to climate change for this year's Envirothon. So hopefully we'll be getting some information and some help in looking at the funding and project selection and support for all these actions that we come up with to address climate issues. So I'm going to turn it over to Sarah and Ashley and let them go ahead and start our program today.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having us, Susan. Ashley, do you want to share or you want me to share?
Do you mind sharing?
I can certainly try. Well, thank you so much for having us to join you today. My name is Sarah Harai, and I'm the Associate Director of Innovation and Senior Advisor to the President at the Connecticut Green Bank. I'll let Ashley introduce herself too.
Hey everyone, sorry, we already started some introductions, but my name is Ashley Stewart. I'm pretty new to the Connecticut Green Bank. I am the community manager, the community engagement manager for the Green Bank, and supporting the scope expansion into environmental infrastructure.
And today we'll be tag teaming through some of the highlights about what the Green Bank does and how we look at projects and programs, and we think about how to evaluate them when we're deciding what to provide funding to and what programs to build. But you should feel free to stop either of us at any time if you don't understand or if you have questions. And as I'm screen sharing, Ashley, perhaps you'll be kind enough to call them out as you see them. So we wanted to get started with just a discussion about what is a green bank, and when we talk about climate change, what does that mean? So a green bank is, in our case, a quasi-governmental state agency. So Ashley and I work for the state of Connecticut, but we work in a little bit of a different way. When you look at the challenges that climate change poses, it's going to be really expensive to build the kind of infrastructure that we need to get to the places that we want to be. And so the role of a green bank is to work with private capital, so banks or families or homeowners or business owners, and help them understand what it means to put their money to work in the environmental space. And so we use our limited public money to attract many multiples of private capital. So for every public dollar we invest, we're attracting about $7 of private capital into the state of Connecticut. And by doing that, we create products and programs that make it easier for consumers to invest in clean energy and environmental solutions. So the Connecticut Green Bank's mission is really guided by our vision of a planet protected by the love of humanity. We are really thinking about how does this impact people? How do we drive the good for the planet? And we, as I said, we're focused on confronting climate change. We're looking at how do we spur investment into Connecticut's green economy, and how do we do it to create healthier, more resilient, and equitable communities. So just for those of you who learn through looking at words instead of pictures like me, this is some of the things that I just talked through. So we're quasi-governmental. We are actually the nation's first green bank. We started back in 2011. We have a finance both on...
Excuse me, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. We are not seeing your slides.
You're not seeing
I see them.
Okay, so as long as
I see them.
Okay.
I see them also.
That's good. Okay, then it must be something on my end, so I will work with that.
Okay, thanks, Susan. So we're the nation's first green bank. We started back in 2011, and our focus when we started was really on clean energy. So we were focused on renewables, energy efficiency, EVs, other kinds of infrastructure. And then as we'll get into talking about in a little bit, last year, in recognition of the great work that we've done in the clean energy space, our mission was expanded to include environmental infrastructure, which means land conservation, parks and recreation, water, waste and recycling, and agriculture. And we're going to start to do the same kinds of projects that we do in the clean energy space in those environmental infrastructure spaces to attract private capital to come into those markets. So when we say we use limited public money to attract private capital, what we're talking about is a small surcharge when you pay your utility bills comes to us. We also receive money through the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which is a multi-state carbon cap and trade system. So this is everybody who is producing carbon contributes in. We get a little bit of that money to drive change. And then we also are participating right now in a lot of different federal funding opportunities as part of the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. We're working with other states around different kinds of projects, and we try to identify where our mission is best supported by other funding that we can pull into the state to drive change. So with our mission and vision, we are trying to leverage these limited public resources we have and use it to strengthen Connecticut communities with a focus on vulnerable communities by making those benefits of the green economy inclusive and accessible. And we're really focused on innovation and creativity. You know, we in general are creating financial products that don't exist in the market. So there's a lot of research and creativity from our investments and financing team to figure out how do we put together new kinds of deals to help attract private capital into these spaces. And we are doing those activities with the goals of creating more jobs in our community, reducing energy burden, which means the percent of people's wealth that they have to spend on energy and electricity costs. We're looking at replacing fossil fuel, reducing fossil fuels, reducing the pollution, and the improving local health outcomes, and in general, making our communities more resilient to the impacts of climate change. So I just went through sort of a lot about what the Green Bank is and what we do. Does anybody have questions about us? Okay. So the final thing I wanted to say about the Green Bank is we have different kinds of solutions for different kinds of customers. And as we're going about through this program, creating different kinds of solutions, it's really important to think about who the end customer is and how you're impacting different kinds of people. And the end customer that you have is really a focus of the Green Bank about how we create products and programs, figuring out who's the right messenger, what is their appetite and sophistication and their experience in the financial space, and how much handholding or support do they need or education about the different kinds of products and programs. So if anybody has any specific questions about our offerings, I included Ashley and my email address on the cover page of this, and I encourage you or your students to reach out to us with questions. We're happy to dive deeper into our products and programs. But at this point, we're going to sort of veer away from our mission to talk a little bit more about tools that we use on a day-to-day basis that we think that could be helpful for your students. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Ashley.
Right. Thanks, Sarah. So the first aspect that we wanted to talk about and present to you all is how do we use policy to support climate investment? The Green Bank has a specific approach. Could you just change the slide? The Green Bank has a specific approach to how it partners with policy. So we develop programs that aim to deliver on our policy objectives, while at the same time ensuring that funds invested are cost recoverable and encourage future investment that benefits the whole entire state. So what does that look like? I created a couple examples of what that might look like across the state. So in the next slide, I've listed 3 different policies. One federal, the Inflation Reduction Act is a new policy, the IRA. Um, that policy aims to set new goals and that will drive investment towards achieving them. So one of those goals includes workforce development and supporting strong, sustainable, and good jobs, right? Which is phrased a lot inside of the IRA. And one of the incentives is workforce development credits, and that trade-off of credit to the benefit is the goal. The nitrogen reduction policy. So EPA has some nitrogen goals, some targets. One example that I could think of was the Chesapeake Bay. Chesapeake Bay has some high TMDL, total max daily load discharges along its coast, the Virginia coast. And the EPA set some policy to aim at reduction of nitrogen. Well, that policy set a new market. So along with that market, we can create a value for the reduction that happened. So in Virginia, they designed a $12 million impact bond with the city to finance the construction of 3 nature-based projects that help to slow down and reduce, filter, and redirect stormwater, particularly around the urban, low, and moderate income communities. The third example is something local that I could think of, the 21 by 23 land conservation goal that the state has. So to continue to increase the role of land conservation in mitigating GHG emissions and making Connecticut a more resilient place, the state has set that goal. And in supporting that goal, we want to create programs that stem off of that. How do we support conservation interests and the targets of the 21% through the programs we create? Sorry if that was all over the place, but I'll pause for a second just to make sure that I'm coming across clearly. Any questions or comments? So basically, policy is a huge driver for creating a new market. That's our perspective on things. So often we want to find out what policy exists, or are there any policy gaps that don't exist in a certain area in order to support the market that can, or the value setting that can happen. Is that cool? No heads nodding. All right, Karen, I appreciate you still being on video. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's good. I appreciate it. So designing a new project is the next topic that we want to talk about. How do we take that policy conversation and make it more literal into how do we design a project or evaluate the potential of a project? Sarah, do you mind leading off on that?
Sure. So we decided to sort of take all of the different tools and products we use and boil them down to a relatively straightforward recipe, we hope. So the first step of this recipe is to think about the project or the program and think about all the ways that it's going to create impact, both good and bad. And so here we pulled 4 of the examples that we think about when we're looking at a project or a program. And these are sort of trying to help us flesh out all of the ways that it's going to impact everybody and everything that's involved. So when we're thinking about money, the first cost question that we often get is, how much is it going to cost? How much money is it going to save? On the economic side, there's also, as Ashley mentioned, a lot of interest right now in, is this going to create jobs? Is it going to create good jobs? Is it going to create jobs that are only here for the lifetime that it takes to construct the project? Or is this going to create a job that's going to be there for a much longer time? Is this going to generate tax revenue for the community that it's in? when we think about health, we're asking, is this going to make people healthier? Is it going to make plants and animals healthier? You know, what else are we looking at in the health arena? Right now, especially as we see an increased frequency and duration of storm events in the Northeast, we are spending a lot of time thinking about resilience. Is this project going to help in the event of a storm or in the event of other climate crises? If there's a drought, is this project going to help? How is this going to impact the resilience of the community? So once you have a list that's comprehensive of all the impacts that the projects are going to create, then we start to think about which populations the project will impact and when. So is this just going to affect the local community? Is it going to affect the whole state? Is it going to affect it now or in the future? And then we take all of that information and thought that we've done, and we look at the costs and the benefits and when it's going to happen and where it's going to happen. And we decide if we think it's worth it to move forward. Or perhaps there's a need for more research. A lot of these we think we know, but perhaps we don't actually have any data to back it up about how much it's actually going to cost or what health benefit it will actually generate. And so there is a time when we're working on projects that we decide we're maybe not ready to make the investment yet because we need to go back and study it more. At the Green Bank, we typically work with higher ed institutions like the University of Connecticut and Yale to look to them for some of their research and expertise when we come across these questions. So we wanted to start with sort of a clear-cut project, which is adding solar to a town hall. The reason I say that this is clear-cut is because solar is now a relatively mature investment. When a town is deciding to add solar to a building, there's a lot of different people who can do it for you. There's a lot of different financial tools and resources and financing available both through the Green Bank and through other private banks that can help make this happen. And so we thought that this would perhaps be an example that was more clear-cut as a starting point. So going back to some of those topics I talked through earlier, on the financial side, there's the cost of the system, there's the cost to install it, and there's the cost to maintain it. If you have it, perhaps you get to save money on your utility bills. Looking back at the federal level, you get an investment tax credit, which is a one-time infusion of cash if you are installing solar. On the economic side, it's going to generate work for the installation contractor. Perhaps if there's substantial maintenance, that probably as a town hall would make you pretty upset because solar tends to be a low maintenance investment. But if there is maintenance, then we're generating a job for a maintenance person. And then a lot of times when we talk about renewables, we're talking about health because renewables generate carbon-free power, which reduces potentially harmful emissions from fossil fueled power plants. So now we're going to take this list and we're going to think about the timing and the location of it. The cost of the system and installation is going to be a cost that's upfront. We need to spend it in year one. But the money we're going to save on utility bills, we're going to save for the next 10 to 15 years. Do we have the money now to make that investment with the knowledge that we will be saving for the next 15 years? And then we also think about location. You know, we're creating jobs in our community perhaps, but the health impacts might not be local. If we are offsetting power from a fossil fuel power plant that is in a neighboring community, we're generating health benefits somewhere else. And all of this will factor into our decision about whether or not to move forward. So we wanted to show you sort of two different tools to look at these kind of projects. So the first one is if you were looking at a specific project. So this would be like adding solar to your town hall. The main tool that we use here is a metric called the savings to investment ratio. So that's essentially asking how much are you going to save over the lifetime of the project versus how much is the cost of investment. And if the SIR, the savings to investment ratio, is above 1, that means that overall the life of the project, you're saving money and you can make the investment. So these are some of the numbers that go behind the project that we just talked through. So a basic financial model is one way to assess the value. But if we are going to, say, create a program that was going to put solar on the roof of every town hall, we couldn't really do a financial model. At that point, we're looking at a program. And at the state level, we use a number of different tools to assess the costs and benefits at the programmatic level. Now, I included a resource here, the National Standards Practice Manual. This is essentially a Bible for state regulators when we look at how to evaluate it. There's 5 different cost tests, and each one asks a slightly different question. So some of them ask, are participants better off? If those towns that are getting a solar on their town hall, are they better off? The societal cost test asks, is the state of Connecticut better off? The total resource cost test is saying, is this a positive cash investment? That's much more similar to the financial model we just walked through. And different states have different preferences for which of these tests get used. And the reason that these are so valuable is that because we can compare them across different programs, we have a shared set of assumptions that sort of go into the formula book for each of these. And so if I'm suggesting that the state should invest money into putting solar on every town hall, and Ashley is suggesting that we use the money to do solar carports at every industrial manufacturing facility in the state, we could look at those 2 different projects and say, if Connecticut only has $1 million, where is it going to put it? Where is the best return for the money, the limited money that we have as a state? So again, I just walked through sort of a lot of the technical side of how we look at products and programs and evaluate them. So are there any questions about financial models or the benefit cost test that I can answer? Okay, so Ashley, I'll turn it over to you to talk about what happens when it's not so clear cut.
So this is going to be a little bit awkward because we did leave a space inside of the presentation for engagement. So heads up that that's coming, but not just yet. So Sarah just outlined what it looks like if we have an established market, but what if we don't? What if there's no established market and we don't know what the options are to reach our climate goals in a certain area? This is kind of where we are with some of our environmental infrastructure measures, our nature-based solutions. So the question that I have is, how do you quantify something that is unknown? So this is where the conversation starts. I have a method about how to approach that. The Green Bank is approaching it through identifying what those unknowns are, what the societal needs are. So for instance, the societal need might be a reduction in asthma rates, or the societal need might be clean water access, or access to livable wages, something that doesn't necessarily have a direct project associated with it, but it is something we want to target or aim at. Once we understand what those societal needs are, who should we be partnering with? Sarah mentioned that we partner with the universities when we need better research or some method or approach to something that we might not know. Maybe the research institutions are one partner, but what other groups or people or organizations have been contextualizing the needs that we're trying to aim at? So some organizations have been better at measuring or creating metrics for societal needs, or social metrics, happiness, health metrics or whatever. How do we partner with them to help quantify those needs into our climate projects? And then also research. That research is a big asset in trying to identify what is known and what is unknown and where we might need more information. So all of those things, identifying the unknown, understanding what the societal needs are. And at times that might mean communicating with communities, having more community engagement, partnering with other institutions that have better metrics or metrics in the areas that you don't have, conducting research in the areas that you are unsure of, or seeking out research that might exist, whether it's qualitative research or quantitative research. That all leads to either a need for a new policy or the need for a new market. So we kind of full circled with the unknown, that having an unknown, whether it's why do we want to invest in land conservation, the unknowns of the benefits or why it's a good thing for the state or the residents. Yeah, we can walk out through that. Anyway, it leads to policy and potentially a new market. And one of the things that I will reference here is we've walked through this process with the new scope expansion on a few of our environmental infrastructure sectors. So the Green Bank has been exploring what does it look like to not know the unknowns, or to start identifying the unknowns and what our goals are in areas of parks and recreation, land conservation, agriculture, and we will have a water one published soon. So those are on our website, and they will give you more information about literally the method me and Sarah are outlining to you all, what policy exists, what are the needs that we're hearing from with our stakeholders or our community organizations, and what does that mean for what we could be doing to meet those needs and policy goals. So I did have an interactive slide. I'm not sure if you all are going to talk back to me, but either way, I can kind of talk it out so you can hear how I think about these 4 sectors. So as the intention was, as a group, if we consider what aspects of these topic areas has a market value already established, and whether or not you can identify what the value is and who is it valuable for. So Sarah mentioned early in the presentation that for every dollar, there's $7 of private capital being invested. Who is that private interest? And often, depending on the project, it changes. Who is interested in meeting that goal with you? So for open space, I don't know if y'all want to engage. If I hear a lot of silence, I'll just fill in the space with what my thoughts are. But with open space, are there, can you identify areas of value around open space? Like what's valuable about open space and who values it? Oh, cool. I love a good chat. So recreation and health, that is a value. Do you find that that has a numerical value, or is it like a sentiment? Like it feels good to have a place to go and hike, which we were kind of talking about earlier. It's valuable for certain animals and ecology, of course. For water quality, absolutely. Now, those are definitely varying types of value. So for water quality, somebody actually does care. Like they put a dollar amount on having clean water access to drink, right? Our water, our MDCs, our regional water authorities, our water providers, they put a dollar amount on that. But for recreation, we might not have the same type of value already established in it. So we might need to do some work with figuring out what does it cost to invest in our parks or in places of recreation and things like that. Go ahead, Susan.
Well, for that aspect of open space and the dollar value with recreation, in the case of state parks, there was a study that identified the dollar value of a state park. And so for every dollar spent within the state park system, they were saying at one point it was $15 to $17 came into that community from people coming there. So there's that ratio that was established. And
Absolutely. And finding those kind of metrics actually help us as investors set a value on investing into a park, right? Or
Yeah.
investing into state parks. So the same actually, some of the local parks will say, we need a value associated, because locally a town will say, I'm sorry, I'm going in circles a little bit with my phrasing, but towns know that if they invest in the parks, property values change. That's
Mhm.
not a direct line of value. So often you have to figure out ways to, how do we contextualize or at least value what's happening on this property, even though the ripple effects are beyond the property. So that's the case with healthcare. So the health industry, by having more parks, we have healthier people. By having more trees, we have healthier air quality. So who should be engaging in the conversation of open space or conservation? The interests might be very different than what we think. And those are the type of considerations we want to have when we're thinking about a new market or who would be interested. The same goes for flood management. Who cares about flood management? Like, right? Not just the coast, who along, like, whether or not it's the insurance companies um or a particular industry that might be along the coastline or along a certain waterway. Like, finding out who cares about it, who values it, who has some type of way to link a number to the actual infrastructure is key. And that goes, I thought these topics were pretty cool. Um, the same goes for locally grown food. Uh, who can invest in that? And DOAG has a whole lot of policy coming out about, or pilot programs, grant opportunities, things like that, in order to talk more and support more locally grown food. But like, the values go beyond just the state agency's work. It goes into health impacts and a whole lot of other things. Go ahead, Susan.
Well, a thing that was crossing my mind when you were talking about open space and then mentioned flood management is, what if you see that the relationship of flood management is benefited by providing for more open space? So if you connect your issues through multi-solving aspects, is that higher value within project development and project support?
So what we're finding is that it definitely brings more interest, but for a lot of it's also a new space. So we're seeing case studies across the country of people bringing in diverse funding sources because they have different benefits. So for instance, they'll bring in funding from one source that cares about nitrogen reduction, while another source might care about uh, oyster populations,
Okay.
or, just the diversity. I think it matters. I think I'm running over my words, but
Mhm.
it makes, I mean, it's just descriptive of life, right? There's no clear cut problem. So our stormwater issues have to do with our water quality issues. Our open space issues have to do with our water issues. So like, things do overlap. And I think it gives opportunity for a diversity of investment and interests. So
Okay.
I wanted to bring these categories up because sometimes in these spaces, there are unknowns. Like, there might be a policy around stormwater, but then there are so many unknowns still within the space. Finding a way to set a value on the unknowns is the challenge, and not to steer away from it, because at one point, the example Sarah provided about solar on homes or on the town hall was an unknown. We just needed the industry to meet the unknowns, fill in the gaps with better research and new materials, and
Mhm.
make it more normal. So at some point, all of these topics will be normalized in the climate conversation. So thanks for engaging in the comments. I really appreciate that. So we're gonna move on to the next slide.
Thanks, Ashley. And so as we talk about all of these different knowns and unknowns and great ideas that we need to attract money to help make them work, we understand from talking to Susan that the students will be pitching their projects to somebody who has potentially the funding available to make them happen. And as we are often in this case, I just wanted to highlight, when you're talking to a public official, we have limited funds. There is more need than we have the money to invest, which is why, you know, we participate in the Green Bank model, which tries to pull private capital in. But even then, you need to help whoever you are pitching understand how the project compares to other good projects that also need funding, and how they should be thinking about it. It's a little bit of hand-holding. And so part of the reason that we started off this discussion talking about the mission is because for us, when we look at a project, we're always going back to, how does this support our mission? And how does this project support state policy and goals? You know, what potential funding sources are already available that could help make this project less expensive? The example that Ashley just talked through, if we have a partner that's very interested in funding oyster beds, that makes a project less expensive for us to invest in, and therefore can make sure that our capital goes further to be able to fund multiple kinds of projects. And so highlighting areas that are complementary to other kinds of funding sources can be really important to help prioritize projects. And then, as I mentioned, you know, we want to think about, how does this support state, local, and federal policy? Just because it's a good project doesn't necessarily mean that it's helping us towards our goals. We view the policy goals at the state, local, and federal level as really challenges to achieve great new things in the climate space. And we are trying to come up with creative ways that we can help reach very ambitious policy goals. And so if you can bring a project that helps us achieve those goals, we're going to look really favorably on that. The last thing that we look at in sort of the policy realm is thinking back to, who does this project benefit, and how can we use that to help hit our mission and our goals. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ashley for the next section.
So looking at the who it benefits is huge, right? And Sarah mentioned it earlier in the presentation, whether it's assessing the project for possible benefits or harms, we need to look at both, because that impact shows at least a full picture of what the project will do. Could you go to the next slide? So questions that we ask are, who benefits from a potential project? Understanding who that is key, whether it's location, demographics, income level, all kinds of things, right? Regional, state, but getting down into the nitty-gritty, if there's a certain type of worker that is benefiting or harmed from a project, identifying that matters, who bears the cost of climate change and the burdens of its impact. And this is where we get into the equity conversation. And this is huge right now. By doing nothing, someone does have to bear the burden of climate change, and that there's a cost there. And I think by undervaluing or not assessing that cost, that the true cost of the burden of climate change, we miss an opportunity to value the enhancements or the remediations that we can do. How can a project designs account? Okay, I don't know how I phrase this. How can we design a project that accounts for the benefits and the harms across society? So yeah, that's huge. Anyway, I wanted to reference the Justice 40 initiative, which is out of the Department of Energy. Definitely worth looking up, because they've done a really good job of contextualizing who and trying to track the benefits, but also who the communities are. So part of the Justice 40 perspective is initiative is that 40% of the benefits of a project funded by the federal government should go toward, I'm not sure if you can see it in here, vulnerable communities, disadvantaged communities. So using that as a way to help shape the conversation, definitely a tool that your students can use. They have some really great definitions as far as disadvantaged communities, defining a community, but also what benefits are. Let me see, is there anything else that I should bring up? Some of the possible benefits that they account for are economic, of course, social, business development, and job creation and wealth generation are some of the benefits that can be received from any project anyway. Sarah, can you go to the next slide? The last tool that I'll bring up as far as community and benefits is there's a tool called the Community Benefits Agreement. And this is just a contract between community and any possible developer. And it's a way that the communities can articulate and also have a commitment with the developer about certain parameters. So like things as far as how many jobs or where should something be sited or what kind of environmental impact should happen or could be limited can be within this community benefits agreement. This is another tool that is used more now and hopefully into the future even more. The last thing that I'll say is as your students start to design what potential projects they will create, considering how they will pull in community and incorporate communities input into their designs is huge. So there's a phrase or a principle called nothing for us without us. So if they're designing something for their own community, making sure that their voice is heard in the development of that project, or if they're designing something for another community, that voice and those perspectives, whatever they are incorporated in. So that's all I have to say about the impacts and community side of things. We're gonna probably wrap up in just a couple more slides. So we'll make space for conversation and questions, comments once we're done.
Thanks, Ashley. So I know that we have painted, I feel like an accurate picture, but the way that we talk about the amount of money needed to change even just Connecticut can feel sometimes disheartening when you look at just the sheer amount of need that we have in the state. So we wanted to end on a positive note, which is these projects can actually drive real change. Through the Green Bank model, since we started in 2011, we've attracted over $2.5 billion of investment into the Connecticut clean energy economy, and we're getting geared up to do the same thing on environmental infrastructure. But just through the work on the clean energy side, we've helped support the development of over 500 megawatts of clean energy. And overall, we keep track of all of the jobs that creates in our communities, you know, the hours that it creates, the tax revenues that it generates, and it has a real impact. We've generated over $100 million in state tax revenues since we started in 2011. We've reduced the energy burden to over 60,000 families and over 6,500 businesses. We have a great small business energy program that we support through Eversource that helps small businesses put clean energy and energy efficiency investments into their businesses that can help make them more cost effective and also more resilient to storm effects. We also keep track of the environmental impacts. We've helped reduce millions of tons of carbon, the equivalent of $2 million passenger vehicles driven for 1 year. We keep track of the public health benefits. You know, we are thinking about how do we improve the lives and outcomes of families across Connecticut? And then, as Ashley mentioned, we're really interested in hitting our Justice 40 goals, which means that 40% of our investments are going into communities or households that are disproportionately harmed by climate change. So we're tracking it across a number of different metrics, from low-income communities to environmental justice communities. And we're doing a pretty good job by our own metrics. But the reason I say this is because keeping track of the metrics and all of the benefit and the costs that we create help us to justify the work that we have done and help us create a story that we can take to our state legislatures to say we want to do things outside of clean energy, and allows us to continue forward into the environmental infrastructure space that Ashley's been leading in. So with that, I'm gonna say thank you on behalf of both of us and open it up for questions. We're really excited about what your students will be working on, and we're happy to provide any resources that we have that can help jumpstart them on their path. And Ashley, we hit 45 minutes pretty much right on the nose, so I am very proud of us.
I do. I was just checking out the comments and trying to respond back to a few. Thank you for using that as a way to engage. One of the comments asks, couldn't improved health from recreation have a dollar value? And yes, people have across the country, there have been different types of programs that have created or linked a dollar value to that, access to nature or prescriptions to health. And it's something that's being taken up more and more. Yeah, any other comments or questions about the whole entire presentation?
I understand, Susan, that we'll send you a version. I think that Ashley and I have a few references that we want to add in, but we can send it to you and you can post it with the rest of the content.
Sure, that'd be great. That'd be perfect.
Great.
While people are collecting their questions and their thoughts, I do have a quick question. Hopefully, it's probably not quick, but I was wondering, in the area of projects and things that would be potentially funded, the category and the topic of climate change education is constantly brought up because there has never been any money that has been set specifically for education on climate change. Now that it's a mandate in the school system, it's one that has to somehow be addressed, and there's several ways to do it. But I was just wondering if there's any area that the Green Bank is working on in providing support or driving education development for school systems.
So informally, I think the staff is dedicated to supporting the schools and getting more climate education. But so yeah, Sarah, me, other staff people have like engaged with local schools, but I don't know as a whole if we've like talked about it or like have plans for it within our mission. I guess if it supports their mission to, then it would make sense. But kind of going back to Sarah's point of knowing our role, like we don't create policy. We want to definitely support policy. There are some things that we don't do, but in concert, we make good partners along with across the state. So if there are new ideas or opportunities, definitely bring them to us because we'd love to partner. But we definitely want to do this role really well, because like you said early in the conversation, funding these creative ideas is something hard that a lot of our environmental organizations are not comfortable with or don't have the skill set to do. So we want to do this job extremely well.
Yeah, so just to highlight on that, the projects that our role is to basically train banks to understand that there is a financial return from doing these kind of projects. And so we are looking for areas where we can demonstrate a financial return where perhaps there's never been one that's been monetized before. You know, in the rooftop solar industry, for example, when we started back in 2011, we said we can monetize the savings that people get on their utility bills, and we can use the savings that they generate and help build a financial product for them that will allow them to not have to put down the upfront cost of the solar project. We're looking for the same kind of investment opportunities in the environmental infrastructure space. Environmental education, I feel like, is so required and valuable, but perhaps not a financeable investment. To me, that's one that perhaps more squarely fits into the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection's mandate, as they're sort of the knowledge, the source of knowledge in the state about you know, all things technical and how they're coming.
Workforce development is a part of our metrics though. So like we have had conversations about how that shows up or will show up in our programs to support it. But again, it goes back to making sure we have strong partnerships. Yeah. Any other comments, questions, weird moments? We can take it all.
There was a question of supporting the rails to trails or intertown bike paths with the Green Bank.
Yeah.
That was-
Definitely something that we're growing in, right? So this scope change is new for us and it is emerging. So feel free to go to our website. We have some materials on there. We did a primer on parks and recreation and a primer on land conservation, which is just overview of what we heard from our stakeholders including CLCC, Connecticut Forests and Parks, and DEP, about like what are the needs across the state, what opportunities are there, and it's kind of just our summary to say, what's the world look like and how do y'all need green banks like us to participate? So we haven't gotten down the road far enough to have established programs in this area, but what we are doing is we're walking that path. So it's real time. I don't have any specific program, but we are absolutely trying to support rail to trails, especially because it helps us meet our policy goals. Our health goals are supporting the Connecticut residents. So definitely check out the primers, check out what we have on there about environmental infrastructure and this new scope expansion. But
the only thing I have to add to that is once you start crossing between town lines, it becomes very complicated whose responsibility it is to pay for it and how you source the money. And so those kinds of cross-town projects are ones that we look to cross-town organizations to support. And that can be a whole other forms. So not to say we shouldn't be doing them, just that it, you know, adding multiple towns adds, you know, more cooks in the kitchen when you're making those decisions.
yeah, but it's a great, those are great opportunities, that's for sure. Yeah, hi, Kramer.
I can't tell if I'm muted.
No,
Yeah,
we can
you're
hear you.
Okay. I was just going to say, in land use across the state of Connecticut, all towns are obligated to look at open space preservation as part of their regulatory process in terms of, you know, the percentage of open space, the goal to have open space. Very interesting in the decision process that it is always thought about open space in terms of just open space for people to be able to walk. And it would be it's too bad that one of the criteria that commission members have to use in open space could be more for climate change mitigation, and that make that a part, because things like, and I brought up in the chat room, core forests and things like that, which can be considered open space, do have real connection to climate change mitigation. And that has to do with, it's in every town that you have to be looking at that in your land use decision-making process. It's never brought up.
Yeah, it is so interconnected with so many of the things that we like, whether it's recreation or fishing, it's so interconnected to some of the other values that we have, but sometimes we silo the conversation
Yeah.
instead of having it all together. So yeah, it is challenging, but we definitely want to start looking into um, we will start looking into what the town's roles, what the plan of conservation and development's
Yeah.
role is in helping to support the same goals. How can we help towns in achieving that too? So yeah, those are definitely questions out there. So that slide of like, what are the unknowns? This is like definitely that space.
Yeah.
It doesn't give me fear. It actually gives me a lot of hope for us figuring out how to make those connections and achieving some really, really cool goals, right?
Mhm.
Like, how can we lead the state or lead the country like we have in being the first green bank, lead the country in doing some revolutionary things in land use or land conservation. So, yeah, I see it as an opportunity, even though it is kind of a challenge. Any other thoughts, comments? We really tried, between Sarah and I, we really tried to present two sides of the climate conversation. We weren't sure whether where your students' projects will land, but the clean energy side of the Green Bank and the emerging environmental infrastructure side of the Green Bank are in two very different places, but one's just further along the road than the other. Hopefully it'll give the kids some hope in that whatever ideas they have can get to the phase of being established and consistent.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. This was definitely really helpful towards that and really gives them a lot of information to chew on around this and makes them consider all of perspectives that you talked about and especially the long-term benefits across the board. I think it'll be really helpful. Thank you guys so much again. So this presentation will be on our Envirothon website. We're also hoping to put it on our YouTube channel. With any links that you guys want, we can put them in there. It's the 4th webinar in the series, so it'll also be on a playlist there. Just as a reminder, there is a in-person workshop this Saturday for those who are still in. And yeah, any other questions before we officially end?
Nice job.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. Well,
Did I see that there was a option for Saturday to attend remotely or not? I was a little confused. I thought I got an email from Envirothon that had a link, but then I'm not sure.
So Susan unfortunately had to leave.
Okay.
So I would email her specifically. I don't think so. I think our virtual options were the webinars to try to balance it out. And I don't know if she has plans to record anything in person. I don't know personally.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Sarah and Ashley, did you have anything else to add?
No, that's it. Thank you so much for having us. Again, we'll send the presentation. There's an appendix with the links to I've been building it as we were talking here. And links to all of the primers and practice manuals that we talked about, and our contact info is in there. Best of luck to you and your students. Please feel free to reach out to us with any questions. And we're excited to see what they come up with.
Awesome. That'll be really helpful. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.